So, Julian Zawistowski, thanks very much for joining us on Ideamarket podcast. So we're really going to be discussing your work over at the Golem Foundation and more recently with Wildland.io. But I've also got some questions just about, I was reading your blog. You have this really fascinating thing you wrote actually quite a while ago now on climate change and crypto. But I've also got some questions about, ideas for the future and things like that. But before we do jump in, we have this sort of opening question here. Instead of sort of just telling people about yourself. Julian, if you were to develop a course or a bootcamp course, and the purpose of it is basically for everyone who completes the course, they become a clone of yourself, what would that course look like?
Wow, that's a hell of a question. Clone of myself. Well, professionally speaking, of course, I'm an economist by trade. So in fact, like a lot of my thinking about technology, politics, society has some economics in the background. And what I find particularly interesting is our institutions, so institutional economics. So this is researching or understanding like how institutions shape world around us. And in fact, like quite a lot of social and political and economic phenomena can be boiled down to the institutions, including like what we observe in decentralized space, blockchains. Like you can name, I think, for example, like a consensus mechanism you have, like or on-chain governance as a kind of institution. So I would probably try to convince people how institutions are shaping our world around. Maybe it doesn't sound really exciting, but yeah, I think that's what I can tell you like from the top of my head.
So I'm interested, I mean, were you of any particular economic school, or was it just general economics, if there's such a thing?
Well, I think this is something that is evolving for every thinking person. So I started like a very liberal approach, which is like a quite common at the beginning of this century in Poland, if you bear in mind all the transformation we had. But then I realized how institutions are important, and there is like this final thing that if people do not coordinate what they do, then they always end in a mess. And I think, to me, like how we coordinate things is the most fascinating issue. And I think we are like quite failing in that at the moment, like around the world. And I also think that what we do in the decentralized space may be like at least part of the answer to that. So no particular school, I think, but also like evolving from quite like a Chicago style liberal to like an institutions believer, and at the same time like a liberty or freedom believer.
So what was it that made you realize that institutions are one of the major factors in sort of the way we organize ourselves? Was there a clear moment, or was it a slow process of realizing that?
That was, like when you start doing things as a naive young person, you take some things for granted. And as it happens, I spent like a few years at the beginning of my career working with the public institutions. Like first in the Polish Central Bank as just employee. Then I had a brief incident in government as an expert, as an economical analyst. And then I moved to the private sector, but still working for public sector as a consultant. And I realized that, a lot of things does not work, and they and and the things that do not work are not performing because they cannot, because the design is wrong, and there is like no way around it. This is like like a broken thing that you cannot really mend. You have to think about replacement, and also like seeing like what's happening around the world at the moment. I think this is very interesting to see how many problems in internal politics we have in different countries are either leveraged or made like a little bit contained by the quality of institutions. And to me, like for example, looking on what's happening in I don't know, United States and United Kingdom, for example, versus what's happening in the Eastern Europe. So like the political processes, the rise of populism, of polarization are pretty similar, but then like everything that happens is here like exaggerated by the poor institutions, which are often like keeping things at bay in countries with better institutions.
So you're not necessarily pro all institutions generally, but you're pro institutions as a model for organization.
Sure, and I also think that in many cases the problem with institutions is that people are trying to rely on state or in the government to provide the institution, provide the solution, rather than trying to organize themselves around something and create their own institutions. And I think like this creation of own institutions is what we actually try to do in a decentralized space, like a lot of us.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you could say you're pretty big on DAOs.
Yeah, I'm pretty big on DAOs. I'm not really sure if DAOs is the best term, but this is like just a term. What I'm pretty big about, and what I think decentralization should really be about is like giving more power to the people, but not in a way that like this is total freedom. You can do whatever you want. That will not work. That will end in chaos. Like this is about like building frameworks for people to coordinate between each other, between themselves. Yeah, I think that's my take on it.
Okay. Yeah, I should introduce. This is Mike, our CEO. But one thing, just to really jump in. And,
well, Mike, nice to meet you.
For those, in relation to what we've been talking about with institutions, I should say that Golem was one of my first ever crypto. I guess investments. Really, it must have been when you first started. But I remember it when it wasn't the Golem Foundation. So in relation to what we've been talking about with institutions, what is the Golem Foundation? Because that's your main thing right at the moment, along with Wildland.
Yeah, well, that's my main focus. So Golem Foundation is a spin-off of like what we started at Golem a couple of years back. And it was created with the assumption in mind that there is like a more than one way to contribute to the ecosystem, like both like a token ecosystem, GLM ecosystem, but like a more broadly looking at that and all the ideas that made us to start like the Golem in the first place. So and with the funding we had and still have, we figured out that we can do like things in more than one way, just building this global supercomputing network.
And one of the first ones of those is Wildland IO, which is, as I understand it, a way for users to interact with the data in the way they want. So it's a decentralized data service, right?
Yes. So, well, this is like a much more than that. Perhaps before going into specifics of Wildland, I will just tell you that my view on like how to like decentralize everything has evolved over time. Like many people in the space, like back in like the 2014, 2015, I was like fixated about technology and tech. This is this experience when you first start like grasping the idea of blockchains, how that works independently. And this is like a combination, of course, of technology and economy, like a mechanism design and incentives that makes the thing running. But in fact, I think that I was not the only one who was like back then very much focused on technical solutions to things, and also believing that everything like has to be like technically like a really decentralized. And while I kind of still believe in that, but I also think that what was proved over the couple last years is that this is extremely challenging, especially for like more complex things than executing really complex stuff. And in fact, like a Golem, what we tried to do in Golem is one of the examples that like decentralizing to like totally everything technically is not really possible. Not always. So the question is like how much you need decentralized and why you decentralize like technically. And I believe the answer is like coming back to what I said at the beginning, is like giving more power to the individuals. So if you are building like whatever network, whatever service, like the goal is to build a system where people like have a say. Like this is like the decentralization part, that are not locked in, and in a way are not forced to do things. So this is like a pretty opposite to what we observe in the big tech at the moment, where due to the network effects, to how things are organized and run, you are like locked in with the, I don't know, Facebook, Google, like whatever. So and I think like a decentralized alternative to all those things is not necessarily like a peer-to-peer connectivity, like a decent consensus mechanism, but designing like things in a way that will not like a lock-in user and will give them say about like what's going on. Like one of the examples, which is like a partly technical, but not really requiring a lot of technical stuff, rather like a way of enforcing it, is something called what was the term exactly? Anyway, like enforcing platforms to be cross-compatible between each other. So you could use, for example, I don't know, Facebook to read your Twitter feed and vice versa, and then that would like create enough of a momentum for break this lock-in, I think, for many users, and allow them to like switch platforms if they are not unhappy with what's going on there. So I think that technology is only part of the answer and not perhaps the most important even. And with that in mind, and like many other things with mind, like we came to these ideas behind the Wildland project. And Wildland is obviously about your data or about your information. So like anything that can have, that has a form of a file that you want to store somewhere. And like in the first step, like we thought like how you can make your data not too tied to whatever backend, like for example, cloud storage backend you store them on. And that is where the idea of like a storage container comes in. So this is like a technically speaking, this is a little bit like a Docker container, but for data. So you just have like your data picked in the container. You can see them in your file system, even integrate that with like whatever app that could use that data. But then you can like switch the backend that the data is on like instantly, and without even like notifying the your file system or your app that change happened. And if you think about that, this is pretty cool, because like in a first step you can think about that as the I don't know, Dropbox or Google Drive replacement, which is already like pretty cool, I think. But then you decentralized, that means that you can have something that will be, in terms of privacy and availability, pretty close to like the most robust decentralized storages you have around at the moment. And by the way, they are like not really working yet. But at the same time, you do not need like a trustless solution, and you can use like an industry standard backends like S3, even AWS S3, and like other like a standard cloud storage providers, just switching like between the backends, providing redundancy. And this is like where you can have like you can achieve like what you want from decentralization, like without like a trying to decentralize everything that is related to technology. You need to decentralize some, but you do not have to like build everything like from all the stuff from the ground. And then on top of that container, to get the container, of course, you need some addressing. You could use just like a simple like addressing that we have around based on DNS. But of course, that also creates like an additional element of failure of censorship. So we figured out that having like an own addressing system is what could really help here. And building that addressing system, like Joanna Budkowska, who is, by the way, like the main like a technical mind behind Wildland, came out with something that we call multipaths or multi-categorization. So that this container can be like built into like your file system, not under like this single path, but under like as many paths as you want. And we integrate that in a way that all of paths are like equal. Well, there is a main path that is used, like if you are not able to like map everything in a proper fashion, we want to do that. But basically, like all those paths are equal, and that gives you like a very low level method of building like a structure on top of your data. So like my favorite example are photos. So at the moment, like if you want to browse through your photos, you usually use something like Photos on Apple or Google Photos, and there your photos are not files anymore. Well, they are files. Some were deep underneath, but this is not how we do that like 10 or 20 years ago, when we had like just like folders with a flat structure and photos. There are like under categories, I don't know, family or friends or by the timeline, whatever. Now you just use your photos on your Apple. You can go through timeline. You can search for like a cat-like animals. You have like a face recognition to group people, and this is like really, really cool. What is problematic here is that as there are not files anymore, at least not for the average user, you're locked in that stack. So I don't know if you guys ever tried to, for example, migrate like things between platforms. This is obviously possible, but you lose all the value added that you have with the photos. Now, if you just store that photos using like our multi-categorization system, then you can build all that information on a file system level, which means that this is as portable as possible. And this is like where we hope that once we are like a production ready, this will give an edge and will allow this portability and competitiveness between platforms. I think that it will be possible at some day to have like on your file system level experience comparable to what you have at the moment with Google Photos, for example, for organizing your photos. And that can be like true for like in every aspect of your digital life. Like for example, Joanna is very much after using that for like a personal knowledge management system, so like a note taking. that you can organize like your personal knowledge along those lines, and break free from any like a note-taking app that you use at the moment. But there are like many others.
I'm interested on your thoughts of. I'm assuming you've heard of Urbit. Urbit, the sort of Urbit, Urbit. No, it's sort of like they're like basically creating a portable operating system. But I mean, it doesn't matter the specifics of Urbit. But it seems that. Do you think this is the way that the majority of digital technology is going? In the sense that you're no longer tethered to a sort of centralized thing such as, say, Windows or Apple, that everything's becoming this portable, almost like a layer, and everything's just becoming like our computing experience will become almost like a patchwork, right? And you just plug in whatever you want. There's no central tether that you have to be compatible with anymore.
I'm not really sure about that. So I think there are like two divergent trends. On the one hand, like people are trying to make things as portable as possible. On the other hand, like big guys are trying to lock you in as much as possible. And I think the latter is like still dominating like what we are around. This fact that you do not like at least for the everyday experience, like on the personal level, you rarely interact with files anymore. Like maybe like in a professional life, if you have to like work with spreadsheets, or if you're a developer, of course, then you interact with files. But apart from that, I'm not really sure.
Okay. So just to jump back to an earlier bit in our conversation, because I'm trying to discern where you stand on decentralization. I'm assuming you sort of think that it is a benefit, but it's not going to be as sort of virulent in every aspect of digital life as, say, some of the really bullish crypto people think it is. Do you think decentralization is going to be as big as people are making out, or do you just think it will fill a certain space?
Well, that depends on how you believe things will evolve. I think that people who really like care about that and have some deeper thoughts like are not really cannot really agree whether there is like a inherent conflict built into the system, so that you have either the centralized world or centralized world, and there is like and there has to be a moment where there will be like a bloodshed between one and another, and one will prevail and other will fail, whichever will fail. The other take is, I think that perhaps we'll be able to like change things in a more evolutionary way. I'm a little bit on the fence here. So I'm a big believer that we can improve like a lot of things by like breaking silos, building like a decentralized governance mechanism, building technology that will make things like as portable as possible. On the one hand, on the other hand, as I said, like there are like a really like a powerful trends that are against that, and also like if you look at the centralized space, like apart from like all the like financial applications, there is not really a lot of things that are usable by like a broader groups of people. There are some, of course, and there are like cool examples also of like a centralized technologies that go along those lines of like a privacy and openness. But I think like that this is like a very difficult battle, and this like a military term is not a coincidence. While I think that things can coexist, I really think that we have to push hard to make people realize this is important, convince them that like sometimes it is worth to give up some convenience for more freedom. But at the moment, I think most people are willing to give up freedom for convenience. like, simple example, for example, there are some alternatives to Google Docs, but still, like, even like with people from our space, I have like a troubles with convincing people, like, yeah, let's use not Google Docs for that, but something else, at least like a HackRND, which is not Google, at least. So I'm not that optimistic as a lot of people in the space that yeah, it's happening, yeah, bullish on everything. I think this is not realistic approach.
Well, I'm wondering what seems to drive a lot of the willingness to sacrifice convenience is some kind of pain, some kind of frustration. Like there are, plenty of ways in which crypto is harder to use than fiat money, but people are sick of the deals they're being offered in fiat money and sick of the restrictions and the injustices, and they're willing to like fight back against that through the inconvenience. And I'm wondering what is can only pain help with this transition? Can only a crisis help with this transition? Particularly with what Golem is doing, I'm wondering like where you see the most frustration pointing in the direction of the future that you're building and setting up infrastructure for.
Yeah, well, I feel like I'm more confident speaking about Wildland at the moment than Golem Network. As for Golem Network, I think that they should speak like for what they work on at the moment, because I'm not actively developing Golem Network for more than 3 years now, actually. but for Golem, I think what can be decisive is if there is like a broader censorship in a cloud computing services, that's for sure. And this is happening. Maybe this is not something that a lot of people realize, but there is some censorship, and sometimes for like a really like a strange reasons like that. It's hard to understand. The other like tipping point here can be like just prices. If the world is still like more and more hungry on computing power, and if chip production crisis that is on the horizon will get worse, then that perhaps this utilizing power that is normally underutilized can be of importance. But for Wildland, which is much more about data availability and data privacy, again, I think that every major like a denial of service for whatever reason from big platforms is something that makes people like realize that this lock in maybe is not that good idea after all. And like I'm not saying I have a lot of like Schadenfreude observing like leaks from big platforms again and again, but I think that's something that really helps people understand that privacy matters, and perhaps they should like care more about that. So yeah, perhaps someone will like have like a big time hack of major platform in a coming year or two, and that might be like a tipping point for a lot of people. But I think like we have enough people in our bubble already to build like products for a population which is maybe not like a huge as a percentage of the world population, but it's like a really numerous, and I think like people are waiting. I would say like desperately for products that would be at least sufficient compared to what is offered like a big guys. And this like for example like Google Docs alternatives that we talked before are a good example. Like a few years back you had nothing, now like a new things, and some of them like a really pretty cool like are popping up, and I think this trend will continue.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I understand the feeling of potentially Schadenfreude when the old systems, glaring uh, issues show up in this sort of very predictable, very visible kind of a way. And
Yeah.
it seems like a lot of like I was just asking, what kind of pain moves people to adopt things that are inconvenient? And I think that's exactly it. That we
Yeah.
have these like repeating patterns of failure. We had that in central banks and the rest of the banking system. We have that in corporate media. We have that in centralized data and cloud computing. So that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, but also, something, just understanding something is enough. Like my personal story was like a few years back, like we had like a meeting at my company, and like we took like a family photo, and I and I uploaded that family photo to Google Photos, and then Google Photos like listed me all the people who are in that photo, like with names and surnames, because they were in my contacts, because they were like from my company, and that was like a tipping point for me, like yeah, but like I think they are like they are learning too much about me. I don't really like it, and that was where I like deleted like everything from Google and started to look for alternatives. Yeah.
Yeah, that's creepy. I mean, I don't even remember when the moment, I began to be able to search for ice cream in my, Apple Photos and then see all the pictures I've ever taken of ice cream. Like, it's weird. And
Yeah. But of course, like
yeah,
the big part of the question is, if this search and tagging happens locally or somewhere else. In many cases, like you can search for those cat-like photos, cat-like animals. I'm sorry, photos being offline. So your device can do like pretty much a lot. But of course, like it will not tag people it doesn't know about locally, and this is sound like a big machine underneath, and this is scary. So I would be afraid, about your phone telling you who is on the photo more than identifying this is ice cream.
yeah, no, I completely agree. I completely agree. I mean, just the difference between the technology that we have on our phones already and what exists on, state level or various levels of industry that are already deployed.
Yeah.
Like you hear it's hard to imagine, and like how can a consumer uproot that, or how, like, what can we do personally to, like, I guess, become less vulnerable to these technological advances that are way stacked in someone else's favor.
Yeah. Yeah, well, this is a great question, and I don't think there is like a simple answer to that. Like on the one hand, of course, like a transparency would help a lot, and it helps a lot. But on the other hand, if people do not care, then no level of transparency will fix it.
I'm interested, Julian. I mean, so far you're quite in the middle of the ground, not super optimistic or super pessimistic about anything. Is there, as we are Ideamarket, we usually bring in these three questions of an idea you're bullish on, one you're bearish on, and one that you think is undervalued. I mean, is there any idea going into the future that you're super optimistic about, that you think, there's not really any negatives to it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my take is still like decentralized governance. So I think there is momentum for that, not only now but long term. Perhaps like decentralized governance to me is something else than just DAO, and I think there is like a lot of things that we need to figure out and do better than we do at the moment in the space. Like I particularly dislike the idea of speculative coin governance, so that you have like a token that is traded and it's used for governance at the same time. For a number of reasons, I think this is like a really, really bad idea. While like the majority of the states is still like after some kind of that, like but overall, I believe that if properly designed, I think decentralized governance could solve a lot of problems in technology. So like my favorite example is that let's imagine that that Facebook users would be able just to vote on like what company runs Facebook, and then they could say, yeah, like this metaverse made so much strange crap, like let's elect someone else to run our social network. And that would be like a pretty cool if they could do that. Like obviously then all the problems kicks in, like that people do not care, that do not vote, but at least they could do that. Or they could like a part of the users could like just fork out from Facebook, like remaining like to be able to be compatible with the rest of the network. So they could take the stuff with, but keep the social graph intact and all the friends still using Facebook still connected, but could move to somewhere else. And there is like a lot of really cool stuff you can think about here. There are some prerequisites for that. In case of social platforms, I think the most important one is this enforced compatibility and breaking that into pieces. So specifically like in infrastructure, protocol level, and like a front-end moderation level should be like two different things. But yeah, I think overall like decentralizing that stuff is something that I'm really, really enthusiastic about, and I believe that's the future. As you noticed, I'm rather like try to be a pretty balanced person. So I'm not saying, yeah, this will this will go to the moon for sure in the next year or two. But I think that there is where it's potential and where we should like focus much more on. Yeah.
I had a follow-up, but I want to let James continue with the triad here.
No, go ahead,
ready.
Mike. Go ahead.
All right. So my follow-up is: do you think the governance, and this might be the wrong framework to put it in, but do you think the decentralized governance needs to get more complex in order to succeed better, or to get more simple? Or is that like the wrong spectrum to look on? Because it seems like there's a lot of experimentation kind of in both directions. And I've wanted to get your take on that.
Yeah, well, I think, for governance to be successful, it has to be like adopted by people. And I think like complexity is not really something that goes very well with adoption. So like my personal take on how we want to do that at Wildland is to start, with pretty simple things. And then like once we gather like more users, more interest, perhaps evolve into like a more complex scenarios. But I think like too much complexity is not really something that will help with adoption. Also, I think that there are some examples that too complex things, especially if you start like something that is too complex and too decentralized at the same time, you can end up like just hacked. And of course, even if the monetary gain you can have from that hack is smaller than that was in, for example, in the DAO hack or the DAO exploit, however you want to call it, there are still might be people interested in doing that, just for breaking things and whatever. And what is really like a problematic, I think, in the decentralized governance is that people might exploit that, and this is happening, in fact, right now with many things.
So in terms of simplicity, do you think kind of like a decentralized autocracy would be a good way to go? Like you have one guy in charge, and maybe you can replace him if you want to under certain circumstances, but generally it's just very simple, and everything goes through that single simple prism. Or would that
Well,
yeah.
that's the question about institutions that we started with. So the problem with such setup is that you have that autocrat, like whatever rules you have to replace him, like chances are that autocrat will be able to override those rules. So you would have like a pretty good governance to do that. But in fact, that very simple idea I presented for Facebook is exactly this. So like let's go with Zach as long as Zach behaves, and then if he misbehaves, let's have some mechanism to replace him. So this is like a simple design, and I kind of like it with but with these asterisks that that may be too simple to really work. Like a simple design, I for example have in mind that we might use in the first iteration of wildland governance is that you simply do not really vote on autocrat, or you do not really vote on features or anything like that, but there is like some fixed stream of funding, like to different parties working on the protocol. And what you can do is just to put weights to like how you see like those parties are performing, and just to make some bigger and to starve the other.
I liked what you mentioned earlier about being able to elect a different company to run Facebook. I like that idea of like entire group elections or entire group replacements. I've often thought it would be great if we could hit a big red button and replace everyone, in American government. Because if you do it one at a time, you're just going to get bullshit of Theseus. It's just going to recycle and stay the same. So I think that's a cool angle on that.
Yeah. That, by the way, this like what you said about replacing government. That's like pretty similar to some ideas within like a liquid democracy movement and ideas. This is not like a really part of blockchain crowd or decentralized crowd, but pretty close to it. Like I think, for example, like democracy Earth is taking like a lot from like a liquid democracy ideas. So yeah, this is pretty much it. Like by the way, I think that like we are too fixated in many discussions on this, like how the voting should work, and I really love things like for example like a radical exchange movement that they have like a pretty cool ideas around voting and how you can make it better. Quadratic voting, obviously, but also some others. So yeah. So that would be like something that you can even build on to make U.S. Government replaceable more often than for years, or less often if people decide so.
Yeah. I like that too. What about, have you heard of like a sort of reverse democracy where basically everyone gets votes, but you cast them for people that you definitely do not want in power, and then the people with the least votes end up with the power?
Sure. This is, I think this is actually one of the ideas that is discussed in radical markets. So sure, because then like a majority voting, especially if there is like only one round of voting, is like a terribly bad way of like determining like preferences of people. So yeah, absolutely.
All right. I'm sure we'll have more governance questions coming up because this is something that we're interested in but not experts in. And just have to siphon the expertise from other people in order to figure this stuff out. James, did you want to go on to the
Yeah, well, I
next?
was just going to ask, so this is the thing, that was the thing that you're, mostly bullish on, but not fully, as you say, you try to keep pretty balanced. Is there anything you're really short on that everyone? Usually, I ask it: is there anything you're short on which everyone else is, really raving about right now? Right? Is there anything you think everyone's loving that you think is going to be a complete failure?
Yeah, well, I'm kind of not really enthusiastic about NFTs. I don't know if this is becoming popular now or still unpopular idea. So and so with NFTs, I'm not really against like a specific things. So yeah, if people want to buy like a picture, like a digital picture for like a bazillion of dollars, they are free to do that. Nothing against that. But overall, like using NFTs as a way of marketing blockchains and adding value to that is a little bit like trying, like if someone tried like 20 years ago to increase like a SQL database based on the fact that this is so widely used for like trading things on eBay. So I really don't get it. Like, where is the connection? Like, where is the relation? Like, so this is something that I'm not really buying into.
It seems like
But by the way,
yeah.
still, I think like NFTs are like a great use case and a great use case for blockchains. And I would love to be able to trade like a real estate on blockchain, for example, like as an NFTs. This is like a really valid use case, and I love it. But still, I don't think this is something that should make like the bubble in the market.
It does seem like it's kind of this cycle's version of ICOs. That there's this kind of there's a technical innovation that is having this. It's the explosion of possibility where everyone's doing everything they possibly can, and only like a little fraction of that will have any longevity. And something that someone else pointed out as well after the ICO boom was that these market cycles are often ways for like Bitcoin and Ethereum whales to exit their positions after a top. They can like cycle down into these other little things and ride the pumps and get out that way more profitably than if they just sell Bitcoin and then wait 4 more years.
Yeah, well, you just described like a pump and dump scheme for the whole like a crypto world.
Yeah, there's definitely that explosion of optimism, and then you figure out where the real justified optimism is over time.
Yeah, what as for yeah, I'm not really like following markets that often, and I'm not that interested in that. But what really like is puzzling me, whether this will be still this cycle of explosion and then like of a winter, or rather like people are now, so many people are invested and interested in that those winters, even if they happen, will be not that severe and long, or perhaps there will be like the last cycle at some point where people like decide like this is all crap, at least from the financial point of view. I don't really know that, and I have no forecast for that.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm not that much of a trader myself and don't follow those things incredibly closely, but it's interesting to figure out what kinds of trends might like help make sense of this stuff that might look so crazy and chaotic and disordered. I'm kind of obsessed
Yeah.
with finding the order in the chaos.
Yeah, I don't think it is possible. I'm kind of in the space for 8 years now, a little bit more than 8 years, and I think this is only growing more complex and more difficult to understand, not the other way around.
Very interesting. What makes you say that? I'm just wondering, like, what kind of complexity are you seeing, like, being unprecedented compared to earlier years?
You know, I think that as the markets grew larger, and also with the more and more options to leverage things, this is becoming, and also with the growing number of exchanges and decentralized exchanges, and also with the growing number of assets, this is just more difficult to follow and more difficult to understand. That's what I mean. But that it's not only growing in numbers, but also growing in complexity. So, for example, I don't think you can understand what's going on at the moment on the markets without intimate understanding of stable coins, of all the leverage options you have. So, yeah, I'm not even trying.
That's true. That makes sense. You do see the all the leveraged options and all the the machinations of trying to squeeze the juice out of every spare dollar. It's very interesting, but there's only so far down that rabbit hole that you can go, unless it's particularly your thing. And when you start having two
Yeah,
or three letters in front of a token in order to signify that it's staked and restaked and unstaked and leveraged
yeah,
and put in a blender
exactly.
and it's just like it gets really nuts.
Yeah.
Um, I've heard, coming back to NFTs a little bit, I've heard the idea that NFTs could provide man, I don't know what the right way to put this is, but like a new atomic unit of internet content, like in the way that we might have URLs now, or like I could imagine a world in which all software is open source on an NFT, and then when it gets used, some kind of royalty goes to the creator. So like if you built something like Facebook, you'd have the wall built by some guy in Guam and the comments built by some guy in Peru. And in each section of this will be like NFTs nested within each other so that the original author gets the credit, but the stack can still be used. Does that kind of jive? Does that make sense to you? Does that seem possible?
Yeah, I think this is issue which, if solved, could help a lot with how the things work on the internet. Um, because it is true that this all run by most of it is now run by free content that is free. People are not rewarded. Uh, there is no real market mechanism here expect from platforms exploding that. So of course, building something like that is a great idea. And I was also maybe not following very closely, but watching things like Steemit, for example. So there is a lot of attempts mm, to reward people for content or for an attention, whatever. Um, Still, I'm not saying it is not possible, but I don't know any model where it would work for real. And I think what you described is a pretty much science fiction at the moment. Partly, of course, because of this just a throughput limitations. So yeah, I don't know the numbers, but I think this is still orders of magnitude larger than what can the best layer 2 or the best scaled blockchains can provide. So for that reason, this is a little bit problematic. And the other is that, once there is like a value in something, people will try to game it, of course, to have some gain without a lot of work, without creating any meaningful content in that case. So you either would have to have some like a trustless mechanism for that, which I cannot really imagine, but maybe it is possible in some kind of like a reputation system, whatever. Or you would have to have some like a gatekeeper or sensor, which is like always tricky, obviously. And then, like at the end of the day, like the question is like, well, the value comes from. So what makes that token that would be used for that rewards, or to give value to that NFTs, like where that value would come from, like what the mechanism here. And I'm not saying it is impossible to design something, but I don't really know what that could be. But this is interesting.
Cool. I'm, don't have strong feelings about it one way or another. It just seemed like a potentially like technically useful function for NFTs beyond just buying pictures for $12 billion or whatever the going rate is these days.
Yeah, sure. But on the other hand, this is again like the issue of like what people are willing to do and what they are not willing to do. And that if you look at the research, like how people are used to the fact that they have like things on the internet for free, that's like really crazy. Like and that goes like true for content, for services, like for everything. I think this is changing. So, like more people realize that they have to pay for stuff to like keep the privacy, have quality, and so on. But overall, I think like people are not willing to pay for things, and for content especially.
Yeah, and I agree. I don't really expect that to change either. I do think there are innovative monetization models for content coming, but I don't think charging the viewer to do something that had been free before is going to catch on very well without some other new element to make it worth it.
Yep. Yeah, well, perhaps that could be like some kind of like a zero-sum game. So like, you create content and you're getting paid for it, but then you can use that income only to see content of the others. So that would mean that the more content you create, the more content you can consume, which is, a little bit contradiction.
That's kind of smart, actually. That's kind of smart. I like that.
Yeah, that just came to my mind. But then
I like it. I like this.
Yeah,
you
can take it.
All right.
You can take it. It's
I
yours.
will. I will. It'll be like a Tinder kind of a thing, where like if you swipe, it costs something, and if you don't like what you see, well, then you're just out a few bucks. And people have different like rankings based on how successful they've been in earning their keep. This is fun.
Well, that could work, for example, for like also just thinking about that like loudly at the moment. That would work, for example, for like stock photos cooperatives, so that you have like photographers at the same time using those photographs for something, contributing, taking from it.
Totally.
So I'm intrigued at the third question. Then is what is an idea that you consider to be extremely undervalued at the moment? One that's being ignored. Other than maybe Wildland.
And it could be, it doesn't have to be a business idea or a technology idea. It could just be knowledge, a certain fact or set of facts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Actually, what I think is worth mentioning here is related to what we work at the moment. So I think what is undervaluated is availability as a critical property of services, in a free internet, in preserving freedom. People are very much focused on privacy, and rightly so. But I think that this availability part is a little bit overlooked, because still people like to take for granted that things just work and they are where they want them to be. And I think this is like a pretty strong assumption that they will be always where they expect them to be. I don't know if that counts for the answer.
Sure, no, that's a good point. That especially that just how accustomed we've become to having everything at our fingertips the way we expect it, that if that's not there, it's going to be a much bigger problem than we anticipate.
Yeah.
Yeah, Julian, I mean, is there anything you'd like to add about Golem, or I know you're not so much with Golem anymore, but Wildland, that you feel that we haven't covered?
Speaking about the governance models, I think that would be interesting just to add, how we envision governance for Wildland, and more broadly, I think that approach can be used in other projects, other platforms as well. So I said before that I don't really like the idea of like a speculative token governance. So for Wildland, we have an idea of something called like a proof of usage, and proof of usage is just like a governance token that is generated based on the usage of the platform. So basically, that makes like that creates a solution where governance goes to the user directly, and the more you use something, the more say you have in the governance. And of course, like the question is how to do that properly, especially how to make that robust enough for not to be like played in a very simple way. And our thinking at the moment is that you need the marketplace, so that using is somehow tied with the transfer of value. And our idea is that you subtract like the tiny fraction of the payment, and you convert that tiny fraction of the payment. You burn it. In our case, you burn it like with the consuming some of the a GLM token, which also creates a sink for the system, and you create this proof of usage that is later used for the governance. And also that this proof of usage is non-transferable, so that makes it not tradable, and that's how we want to sort out the big question of who can vote in a system, because if you're designing the governance system, then of course the one of the most important questions is who can vote. And how strong is the vote of the given person, of the given user. So that's our take on that, and we are pretty excited about this approach. We'll see how it works, how is it going to work.
So the governance is directly related to basically those who are most reliant and most skin in the game with regards to the system they're using.
Yeah,
so why
exactly.
hasn't that system been used before? That seems like the most sensible one.
Well, I don't know.
Well, I guess it's anathema to the.
I
mean, I guess it's like a form of democracy, right? Because if democracy is everyone gets a say, you're not saying everyone gets a say. You're saying only the people that matter with respect to the foundation of the system get a say. Okay.
Yeah. Well, exactly. Of course, in a way, of course, the system is widely used. So at the moment, if people are designing products, they're listening to their customers. Not always, not to all the customers, but basically, like if you're creating a product, then you want to sell that product, and you're listening to your customers to make like the best product that they can get, because then you will sell more of the product, and it's like a pretty simple mechanic. Of course, like I think this model became problematic with software, especially, and of course especially with the free services. But because like with the free services, there is like a real misalignment of the goals of the users and of the service creator. So I don't know what can be the goals of the users. That depends on the story. But of course, like in case, for example, of the social platforms, and we can see that like all the time, the incentive is to make people use the platform as much as possible. So you do not use your like a social media platform to just communicate with other people, like sort out things that you need to sort out with them, like coordinate. But the platform is created in a way that is not really beneficial to you. It's created in a way that will make you spend as much time as possible there, which is probably like not really optimal to your welfare. So so this model like might be like when you listen to your customers, but you do not have your goals aligned with their goals, and their goals are not really revealed, might be pretty like fucked up for free services. And even for paid services, of course, like you want to create as great product as possible, but you also want to lock in people as much as possible. And this is like true for like I think the best example is Apple and what they do like in their stack. So everything is so closely integrated within Apple stack, and admittedly, like most of the times, user experience is just great, and you pay real money for that, and you get like a real service. But underneath, everything is built in a way that locks you in. And once you have your first iPhone, then you realize that having now switching to macOS will be like really beneficial, because that all works together. Then buying to that like an Apple Watch, like whatever else you can buy, like Apple Car soon, like makes like that all like really bundled, but that close you in. So even if you pay, but still like those goals are not really aligned of the customer and of the producer. So this is like pretty much obvious why this is not used on the in a traditional marketplace with the traditional producer and customer. And as for the decentralized way, the decentralized world, I think no one has used that for like a pretty simple reason. First, like this is much easier to bootstrap a project around a speculative token rather than like that kind of governance token where you have like a product and users first to even think about. So that's something that might be just difficult to start. And the other problem that, of course, the other problem we still have is that we do not really, outside of the at least financial use cases, we do not have that many use cases yet with like real users and real marketplaces. Because I at the moment I don't have idea how to make that without the marketplace. Maybe NFTs would be like the answer here, as you noted. But then that would be like a pretty far away anyway.
So what is your what is the immediate future for you then at the moment?
At the moment, we are working on a customer grade implementation of Wildland. It will be called Cargo.
Mm-hmm.
it will first come on macOS, then other desktop platforms will follow, and then later web and mobiles as well. This will be a little bit like the Dropbox or Trezorit. So basically, you will be able to store your personal files there, but you will be able to you will have autonomy on what backend it's stored it. You will be able to add redundancy if you want, so store your things on more than one backend. And then this will be a start on which we will gradually build upon.
That sounds great. I like the name too. Cargo is a good name for that.
Yeah, that's that was a little bit inspired by the fact that this is Wildland, but there is a container, and you had this cargo cult in Pacific during the Second World War and after. So that was the inspiration. So
that's right.
That you can imagine that the crate of goods somewhere in the middle of the jungle, which is Wildland. So that's how the branding will look like, most likely how it's inspired.
Nice, yeah, it's a great name. I mean, whereabouts can we? What's the site address for Wildland? And when?
For Wildland, it's wildland.io. You can also go to docs.wildland.io. There is an instruction on how to use what we have at the moment. At the moment, we have a command line client that you can have to test all the features of Wildland. But this is still a prototype grade. So we are improving it now and building graphical interfaces, improving UX, figuring out how exactly it should work for the user. So this is our work at the moment.
Wow. Well, I mean, it's all been super interesting, Julian. I've got nothing else really in my questions to add. I mean, Mike, is there anything you'd like to add in?
I think my last question is, how do you expect people's behavior to change once these kinds of technologies are widely adopted? Do you it seems like such a fundamental primitive that you could imagine a lot of kind of larger scale shifts around it as a result, downstream. I'm just kind of wondering if you have any particular vision for that, or hopes or fears, or kind of what your thoughts on that might be.
So what struck me when I first started experimenting with blockchains and with the decentralizations in general is that this is actually something that requires from the user much more awareness and much more responsibility. So the great example is end-to-end encryption, I think. So for end-to-end encryption to make sense, obviously you need to keep your keys to yourself, your private key to yourself. So if you lose it, there is no one will help you. It's just lost, and you're fucked. So on the one hand, this is great. So you encrypt your data, and really no one can get access to it. But on the other hand, this is pretty terrible that you have to be aware enough and responsible enough to take advantage of it. And overall, I think that if we are able to take off with all those technologies, that would make that the people are more aware and more responsible on what they do with their digital lives, at least, maybe with their lives in general.
That makes perfect sense. It's been great to see and fascinating to see how in another context, the existence of Bitcoin has made people rethink the fundamental assumptions behind economics and money and how it all works. Just having a new way of approaching things that makes people want to research and makes people want to understand, the more fundamental principles behind
Yeah.
everyday behavior. And that's absolutely something that I could see applying here.
Absolutely. To me, one of the eureka moments was when I realized that for cryptocurrencies, you can memorize your private key, which is obviously not the simplest thing to do, but
A little
obviously you can
precarious.
do that. It is
Precarious.
You can do that. Yeah, you can do that. And then you can essentially travel around the world with your wealth in your mind, and this is mind blowing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Huge. I think I'm gonna need to let these things stew a little bit longer. When is Cargo coming out? Because that is the kind of tool that I might, start using right away.
Well, you can start using it even at the moment, but with a lot of pains.
Okay.
So as for the prototype I mentioned, in this business, revealing any dates is
Okay.
a
Oh
really
yeah, you're right. You're right.
tricky thing. So
You're right. I wouldn't
yeah,
ask me to talk about that stuff either. That's a good point. I'm just saying. Saying I'm interested.
Couple of months ago, we were assuming 9 months, but at the moment, I would say 9 months.
I completely understand. It's everything is always the same amount of time away. It's like driving around Los Angeles. Your neighbor is a half hour. The beach is a half hour. Downtown is a half hour. It's crazy. Anyway.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm just saying that I'm looking forward to when that becomes available with perhaps a little less pain, but sounds great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hope you will be able to use it pretty soon.
A lot to look forward to. Yeah, Julian, it's been really fun. It's been great. Thanks for coming on, and we'll be sure to link Wildland and everything you guys are doing in the description below.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and pleasure is all mine. It was really fun to talk to you and meet you.
Thank you.
Likewise, I'm really glad. We'll stay in touch.
Sure.